Hi everyone, my name is Gabriel and this is the Hour of the Raven, your channel for everything Ravenloft, RPG, Dungeons and Dragons and horror. Today we will conclude our studies on vampires and explore the fascinating progression of power that they suffer with age, as well as the various strains of vampirism identified in the creatures of the night. Although these creatures of the night are the classic Dungeons and Dragons villains, in the Ravenloft campaign setting, vampires received great attention and development in order to become unique and complex opponents. The main book with information about these creatures is a Van Richten Guide to Vampires, a deep study of the blood-drinking undead, and the first in a series of scholar tomes about the horrors that inhabit the lands of the mist. This video will not be focused on game mechanics, but will be directly inspired by Ravenloft's old campaign setting books about vampires, especially in the 2nd edition era. If you play the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons, you see that there are some differences in the approach of vampires. But this video can be a useful source of information or even inspiration to create new and more dangerous enemies for your campaign. In this video, we will unveil a vampire power progression and the age categories, and explore in detail the varied strains of vampires that roam the night of the Land of the Mists. Are you ready? Then get closer, as we will unveil the effect of vampiric blood on the body of mortals, and the different ways that such a curse can corrupt the victims of this condition. Hour of the Raven. Vampires are unique creatures. The curse present in their blood not only revives their dead bodies, but corrupts their essence and transforms their powers in a unique way, reacting according to their race, history, and deepest desires. The research of Van Richten and other vampire hunters point to the existence of several lineages and vampiric strains, and even within what we can consider a typical vampire, there are great differences of powers according to his age, history, and even the form of their transformation. The most common strain of vampirism, which we will refer as the typical vampire, can manifest a number of variations in its powers and weaknesses. A major differentiating factor for these creatures is the age of a vampire. Vampires often progress in power and develop new and dangerous skills over the years. Some scholars believe that this progression of a vampire power stems from the natural progression of these monsters, who over time become more experienced and develop new and unholy skills. Others, like Dr. Rudolf von Richten, fear that all vampires, even newly created ones, have the potential to exercise such supernatural gifts and powers, but the mastery over such abilities is something that needs to be learned by the creatures of the night. This prospect is somewhat frightening, if even a newly created vampire could potentially be as powerful as the most fearsome of the patriarchs, but it would justify what the old vampire hunter calls a precocious vampire, creatures that, despite not being so old, demonstrate skills and powers typical of ancestral vampires. In his research, Van Richten classified vampires into 7 different categories of age and power. A fledgling, from 0 to 99 years of existence. Mature, from 100 to 199 years of existence. An old vampire, from 200 to 299 years of existence. A very old vampire, from 300 to 399 years of existence. An ancient vampire, from 400 to 499 years of existence. An eminent vampire, from 500 to 999 years of existence. And a patriarch or matriarch, with 1,000 years or more of existence. Although the old vampire hunter confesses to have elaborated such classifications based on his research, he admits that the terms used are the same used by the creatures of the night, to refer in deference to older vampires as a symbol of respect. The vampire's attributes are affected by his age. While all vampires demonstrate exceptional strength, agility, intelligence, and charisma, over the years they start to become even more powerful, and ancient vampires demonstrate superhuman attributes. These creatures' resistance also increases exponentially over time, and they become even more difficult to defeat, with their energy and regeneration capacity enhanced by the effect of time. The invulnerability of such creatures to weapons also increases exponentially, and only legendary magical weapons are capable of injuring ancient, eminent, and patriarch vampires. The ability to dominate and charm their victims also improves over time, making it very difficult to resist the will of an ancient vampire. These creatures do not depend only on their eye gaze to dominate their victims, and ancient and eminent vampires can charm and impose their will with just the sound of their voices, and patriarchs and matriarchs can try to dominate their victims with just the strength of their thoughts, even at a considerable distance. Eminent and patriarch vampires can also develop unique and salient abilities over time, not commonly found in younger vampires of their kind. These powers can be varied, such as teleportation through the shadows, the ability to pass through walls and solid objects, a touch capable of draining skills and vital force in an even more lethal way, or even a constant aura of fear, just to name a few examples. Luckily for mortals, the existence of ancient vampire is rare, and few are the undead who reach the age of patriarch. Perhaps the dangers of a predatory existence, or even the weight of immortality on the vampire mind, have a major impact on the survival rate of this monstrosity over the centuries. The typical vampire strain is not the only lineage of vampires that roams through the night, and many other strains have already been identified and catalogued. Before we start a deeper study of the many vampiric strains, let's take a look at mortals who were somehow contaminated with vampiric blood, but without becoming truly undead. A dhampir or vampire are mortals contaminated with the vampire blood, while still in the womb of their mothers, were victims of a vampire blood drain, or on the rare and mysterious occasions when a vampire managed to produce a child in a mortal. Those infected are mortals, but they have the need to feed on blood, and they have a few vampiric powers, such as the ability to charm with their eye gaze, command beasts, and even the invulnerability to attacks by common weapons. They do not, however, have the vampire's weaknesses, and can walk in the sunlight, making it very difficult to identify their presence among mortals. Another type of mortals infected by the vampiric curse is the Warlock. These poor creatures were selected by vampires to become brides or grooms, and began their process of transformation into undead companions. However, their vampiric companions were destroyed before the process was completed, and the Warlock remains in a miserable condition, not being a vampire but not a mortal either. These sad creatures share with the vampires their strength and their ability to charm with their eye gazes. Their touch can drain the spiritual energy of their victims, depleting them of their wisdom. When destroyed, these creatures turn into a puddle of tears, which will run toward its home and lair, where it will regenerate itself slowly over many hours. The tragedy of a Warlock existence is that he lives in eternal yearning for his vampire master and creator. He bewitches humans and forces them to dress and behave like the vampire maid who would transform him. The relationship lasts until the Warlock's frustration with his failed creation leads him to destroy their partners and find a new replacement for their desires. Among the true undead, the Nosferatu strain is one of the most common variations of vampires. In addition to the habit of drinking blood, the touch of a Nosferatu vampire drains his victims of constitution, leaving them weakened for many days. Victims who are completely drained of their blood and constitution rise from their graves as new Nosferatu vampires. During the day, these creatures go into a state of deep coma, remaining inert like a stiff corpse. Victims of a Nosferatu vampire's gaze become lifelong slaves to their masters, unless they are cured of this curse by a powerful cleric. Victims of this domination have a telepathic link with the vampire, by which they receive orders from their masters. Another vampire strain is the Calaca, a degenerated species of wild vampires, whose mind is damaged and their undead body carries a number of diseases. These creatures' minds are destroyed by their transformation, and they survive as scavengers and plague carriers. They have no fangs, but they feed by opening cuts with the tip of their tongue, which is as sharp as 2 needles. Their appearance is cadaverous, and their eyes shine in a greenish light, and those who face them directly may enter a feverish unconsciousness. Anyone touched by their claws can be contaminated by numerous diseases, and these vampires can drain their victims' constitution by touch. These undead can control rats and mice, or take the form of a giant rat or a small swarm of rodents. Any mortals who dies as a result of one of the diseases spread by a Calaca, or is drained from his entire constitution by their touch, will rise from the dead as another vampire of this strain. These creatures can be repelled by garlic and also anise. To destroy these creatures, it is necessary to pierce an iron stake through their skulls and then burn their bodies until they become ashes. A particular strain of vampirism emerged from the macabre experiments of Dr. the Clown Heinfroth, or Dr. Dominiani as he is known today. To try to find a cure for madness, Dr. Dominiani performed experiments, injected fluids from the spine and brain of healthy and sane people into insane patients. In one of these experiments, he ended up collecting the fluid from a woman who was being prepared to become a bride to Duke Gundar, the vampire who ruled the domain of Gundarak. As he performed the experiment, the fluids contaminated the receiver with vampirism. The strain of cerebral vampires was born in this way, creating a vampire specimen that feed on the victim's brain fluid by beating the back of their necks. While these vampires are feeding, their victims slowly loses their intelligence and wisdom, and creatures totally drained of their intellect in this way emerge as ghosts in the service of the vampire. These vampires share many characteristics of the common strain of typical vampires, but these undead creatures are not harmed by sunlight or running water. Although immune to sunlight, they still need to rest in their coffins for 8 hours at some point to restore their energy. Their gaze causes hypnosis in their victims, and their touch can cause mental confusion in their targets. These creatures are driven away by the smell of pure alcohol, which, like garlic for ordinary vampires, causes them great disgust. The curse of vampirism is not passed between these cerebral vampires and can only be created by the transfusion of brain fluids extracted from people who are contaminated by vampiric blood to become vampire brides or grooms. The secret of their creation is kept by Dr. Dominiani, and all existing cerebral vampires are currently under his command and service. Another vampiric strain very common in the domains of Hokushima Taiyo and Strihaji is that of the Shaanxi, or Oriental vampires. This vampiric strain originated from these distant lands and have several distinct characteristics from the Western vampires. However, a hunter should not be mistaken with the name of this vampiric strain, since regardless of ethnicity and cultural origin, Any humanoid mortal can be contaminated with the Western or Eastern vampiric strain. Shaanxi are endowed with long nails, which become larger with the age of the vampire, and function as claws. These claws, even if broken, regenerate during their sleep. They can cause paralysis with their gaze, and they can become invisible and incorporeal when they wish, passing through walls and solid objects. These vampires are able to levitate and can summon swarms of insects or big felines under their command, while still being able to turn into tigers or other big felines. Garlic doesn't bother them, but they can be kept at bay with the scent of rosemary. Although they can enter homes without invitation, an incense of rosemary or myrrh will keep them away. To paralyze these creatures, you need a stake made of bamboo. To completely destroy them after the impalation, you need to insert a blessed piece of rosemary into the vampire's mouth, and then seal the creature's eyes and mouth with a silver needle and a thread of gold. A more rare and exotic vampire strain is the Velia, an aquatic species of vampires created by an ancient curse in the world of Mystara. The true form of these vampires is that of a horrendous humanoid creature, with bluish skins, gills and claws. These vampires can assume a human form, generally very attractive, but with clothes in tatters, wild eyes, and a humid and matted hair. While in the human form, they can sing to charm their victims, which have made several scholars to confuse them with sirens. A Velia's touch drains the vital energy of their victims, and victims that are killed by the Velia by this way becomes wights under their command. A new Velia is only created if a Velia transfers part of their blood to their victim, or through a long forgotten curse. These aquatic vampires must always keep part of their body in contact with water, or they will be destroyed in only a few rounds. Velias that inhabit the sea can transform into huge white sharks and manta rays, and those who inhabit swamps or lakes tend to transform into albino crocodiles and eels. When defeated in combat, they become liquid and merge with the water, and return to their aquatic tombs, where they need to recover from their wounds. An even rarer vampiric curse is that of the Penanggalan, which affects only women. These undead are able to walk during the day in the form of a mortal woman. However, before nightfall, they return to their lairs, where the creature's head stands out from its body, and together with a hideous tail, it flies through the night in search of a victim to drink their blood. The eyes of these creatures can hypnotize their victims, and they feed on a single target for almost an entire night, usually preferring other women as their victims. Victims are weakened in strength and constitution, in addition to losing blood to the monsters. Women who fall prey to these creatures may rise as new Pendulum vampires. Those who find the headless body of a Pendulum discover that it is preserved on the outside, but when looking through the neck, they discover the dry and mummified interior of the body. If the head is prevented from returning to the body until sunrise, both will decompose quickly and the creature will be destroyed. Although the numerous vampiric strains cited can affect widely different types of humanoid races, some vampiric strains have manifested themselves only in some specific races. The Drow consider the vampire curse a blessing, referring to it as love kiss, a condition that gives him more power and allows him a better understanding of the universe. Most Drow vampires are women, but some men can also be gifted with this profane gift. Vampire Drows keep their magic skills as well as their protection from magic, typical of their race. Their gaze can cause fear and awe, causing their victims to drop their weapons on the ground, unable to act unless directly attacked. The touch of these creatures drains the vital fluids of their victims, which are permanently weakened until they receive the attention and healing of a powerful cleric. Their gaseous form consists of a poisonous vapor, and they are capable of taking the form of giant spiders. Vampire Drow can summon and have full command over any type of spider, as well as any drider that is nearby. Holy water has no effect on Drow, but water from a waterfall can harm them. Drow vampires cannot cross a line of salt, and the stakes capable of paralyzing these creatures must be made of salt stones. Their complete destruction only occurs through exposure to the sun, submersion in a waterfall, or, after impaled, being tied with a rope with silver threads and incinerated for 12 hours. The vampiric strain of the dwarfs is considered a terrible curse, since their race considers death to be a worthy end of a mortal life. The touch of a vampire dwarf drains its victim's constitution, and its gaze is capable of causing supernatural fear in its opponents. They are immune to holy water, but suffer from contact with water extracted from natural sources. A dwarf vampire is not able to change into animal form, but can summon any burrowing or underground animal at his command. These vampires are unable to enter a building that has no trace of stone or earth in its construction. These undead have great capability for regeneration and are even able to expose themselves to sunlight, although they lose their capability of regeneration and feel a great discomfort by the exposure. These vampires can use their ability to travel through stone, crossing stone and rock as if they were incorporeal, and can even take with them objects and people they are grabbing. These vampires cannot cross a line of metal dust, and can only be impaled by a natural stalagmite. For its complete destruction, however, after impalement, their heart must be removed, bathed in oil for 3 days, and then incinerated. The vampiric strain that affects the elves is one of the most tragic of transformations. The admirers of beauty and nature discovers that they become undead with deformed and bestial features, and whose touch is capable of killing any type of vegetation. The most striking feature of this vampiric strain is that they have daytime habits. An elf vampire is active during the day and must hide in his coffin before the sun goes down, or suffer severely or even be destroyed by the exposure to the night sky. Despite destroying and corrupting vegetation, these vampires usually live in forests and are able to travel through plants, entering a large tree trunk and emerging into other tree trunk of their choice. The touch of an elf vampire drains the very creativity, personality and magnetism of their victims, draining them of charisma. A victim, upon realizing the grotesque feature of a vampire elf, may become paralyzed while watching the monster, and some may even collapse and die at their sight. An elf vampire can transform himself into a giant eagle and summon all sorts of forest creatures to his aid under his command. They are able to use their supernatural gifts to control the forests and woods, using the vegetation against their opponents. Holy water has no effect on elven vampires, but 3 saps can harm them. An elf vampire cannot cross a line of flower petals and cannot enter the underground. They can be destroyed if forced to enter the underground for a long period of time. They can be impaled with stakes made of coal. After being impaled, they can be completely destroyed if they are beheaded and their head is burned in a fire made of flowers and shrubs. Gnome vampires are undead that inhabit the underground, and these vampires show their macabre smile. All those who catch a glimpse of them can be led to a hysterical laughter that prevents them from acting. Although they are not endowed with great strength, the touch of these vampires causes muscle stiffness, which drains their victims' dexterity and can lead to death. Gnome vampires can only be hurt by magic weapons that contain metal, and they are very resistant to spells. These vampires can assume a spectral form when they wish, becoming a luminescent sphere just like a will-o-wisp. Although they cannot transform into animals or summon animals to their aid, they can command any animals they encounter on their way. A gnome vampire can be attracted to a precious gem, and their obsession with these gems can lure them and cause them to lose their attention in combat. These vampires are immediately destroyed if they come in contact with sunlight. They can be impaled by a long silver needle, and to be finally destroyed after impalation, they must have their hands cut off and thrown into a natural volcanic water, and precious gems must be placed over their eyes. Goblin vampires are monsters created through curses cast by witches. These hideous creatures have long claws, long and protruding fangs, which grow out of their mouths, and their eyes shine with a sickly orange light. The presence of these creatures causes a wave of panic, and the vampire goblin feed on the fear, gaining strength and power. These creatures are not affected by sunlight and hunt during the day, but moonlight can be lethal to these monsters. They cannot take other forms, nor can they control other animals. They have a deadly hatred for their own race, and they will hunt and feed on other goblins. An obsidian stake can immediately destroy these monsters if it's stuck in their heart. Accustomed to the comfort and simple pleasures of life, the transformation of a halfling into a vampire is a tragic event. These little monsters are not endowed with great strength, but their touch is able to weaken their victims of strength and constitution. These vampires are endowed with the aura of fatigue, capable of causing the exhaustion and lethargy of those close to the vampire. They are able to take the form of small forest animals such as ferrets, beavers, and skunks, and also to summon and command such animals. These vampire creatures are endowed with great capacity for regeneration, and can turn into a light dark smoke, with a pleasant and sweet smell, such as that of a pipe or a cooking fire. These creatures can be kept at distance by the smoke of a cigarette or pipe, and cannot enter a room that has a fireplace lit. They suffer great damage if exposed to rain, and can be destroyed if they do not find shelter. They can be paralyzed, with stakes made of wood still smoldering from a fireplace. To finally destroy them after impalation, the creature's hand must be severed and thrown into a fireplace, where they must be completely burned. In the domain of Cithicus, we find a vampire strain that affects the Kender race. These creatures were not created by blood contamination of a vampire, but through a profane ritual performed by Lord Soth, who cruelly and slowly exterminated an entire village of Kenders, and used profane rituals and magic to corrupt their souls and bodies. Kender's vampires are scrawny figures, with skin stretched over their bodies, and speak only through sighs, as if the act of speech is painful. Their bodies are slow and rigid, but endowed with great strength, and the touch of their claws can also affect the spirit of their victims, and draining them of intelligence and wisdom. These monsters, once per hour, can give an horrendous laugh, capable of causing madness to those who hear their sound. These vampires can be turned away by shimmerweed, a plant native of Grimm that also grows in a few places in Citicus. They are unable to cross the borders of Citicus, given their connection to lots of unholy magic, and if forced to do so, they will be immediately destroyed. Kender vampires can assume the spiritual form, becoming a poltergeist, absolutely invisible and immaterial. These vampires will be immediately destroyed if impaled by their own hoopbacks, a weapon typical of the Kender culture, a mixture of a stick and a sling, which are always carried by these little creatures. Finally, we present an arrowhead strain of vampires, fruit of the experiments of Lisa von Zarovich and the High Master of the Idiots, to try to destroy the brain god that rules the domain of Bloodsport. The elite vampires were unstable, crazy and wild, and were discarded by their creators, but even so they survived. These creatures act wildly and brutally, and their touch is able to drain the vital energy of their victims. They are unable to use psionic powers or use elaborate mental commands of the vampiric domination, but they are still capable of emitting a dangerous psionic explosion, capable of paralyzing and maddening their victims, and then getting them ready to be drained of their blood and brain mass by their tentacles and fangs. So many are the creatures of the night and their curses, and more strands and lineages can be found if we dwell searching in the darkness. We hope that with this knowledge we can finally be prepared to face the threat of vampires. Stay with us and subscribe to this channel. Our path approaches the borders of Forlorn and Cartacus, and we can hear in the distance this song composed by the howls of the many wolves that roam their forests. Join us as we will explore the picturesque land of Cartacus, full of sounds and music.